This is an ODB Films production. Visit odbfilms.com today.
In Latin, Renovo means to renew, restore, or revive. This show is all about growing in our understanding and practice of faith. Past episodes are available wherever you like to listen to podcasts. I'm Doug Tuke, the Vice President of Ministry Advancement at ODB Films, and today we look at St. Hildegard of Bingen. This is a listener-requested show. I'm super excited to be able to do it. I love St. Hildegard. I cannot wait to talk about her. I cannot wait to teach you about her if you've never ever heard of her, or you have heard of her, but you never really read her and didn't realize the level of her awesomeness. This is an awesome show. She's an awesome person. And dig in, buckle up. This is going to be great. So lots of biographies of Hildegard of Bingen read like a bunch of accomplishments. Like there's just a whole list. And there's a ton that kind of focus on her contributions to humanity and spirituality. And that's great. And I've kind of made a list like that for the show. But given like her crazy, far-reaching impact, it's actually really hard. It's super challenging to kind of like be succinct because this person like was so like just widely researched, and she's interpreted a ton of different ways, which is what makes her such a gem in the church. So beginning in her early childhood, Hildegard of Bingen, she experienced visions. She couldn't really explain them to other people, and her visions were not really perceived through her eyes and ears. So rather they were kind of experienced as like sight and sound, seen through her inner senses. That's the way she describes them in her journal. So as a result, Hildegard kept her visions to herself for a lot of years. Okay, she was born in 1098. She was the 10th daughter of a noble family. I have 5 daughters, 10 daughters. That's crazy. I wonder how many bathrooms they had. When Hildegard was super young, her parents pledged her and her dowry to the church, not uncommon at the time. And the offering was actually kind of an act of symbolic marriage. And it was most likely done without consulting her at all or gaining her consent. Just imagine that today. That's unbelievable, right? So Hildegard was dedicated to religious life at the Benedictine Abbey at Dissim-Bodenberg. She took her vows on All Saints' Day in 1112. And while at the Abbey, she came under the care of her distant cousin, Jutta von Sponheim. Yes, I just love saying that. So only 6 years older than she was, Jutta played an important role in her life, a really important role, actually. It comes up a lot in her personal diary. She served as a teacher, a confidant. She also created a cool environment for Hildegard to cultivate her faith, really her relationship with God, which is gorgeous. So while she's living at the Abbey, she taught Hildegard all these kind of rigorous Benedictine traditions, and she developed her intellectual skills in reading, writing, Latin, religious verse, and all of that. So when Jutta died in 1136, all the sisters elected Hildegard as the head mistress of the convent. So you can imagine, that's not very old. She had developed quite the academic prowess as well as just her personality and her spirituality. So Jutta was the first person with whom Hildegard shared her visions. She was the first one she told her about. And Jutta, in turn, shared Hildegard visions with Volmer, the prior of the abbey. So Volmer was the person to really validate these incredible visions. And for more than 60 years, he played a really influential role in Hildegard's life. Okay, so this is a period of her life that's amazing, the visions themselves, but also really awakening in her midlife. So Hildegard of Bingen says she was 3 years old when she first saw a vision of the shade of the living light, quote unquote. And she was 5 years old when she grasped that others wouldn't understand what she was experiencing. So even at this age, Hildegard knew that her visions were really godly. They were a gift from God. Now, at the age of 42, Hildegard of Bingen experiences what she called a midlife awakening. So she received a vision wherein she believed that God had instructed her to write down what she saw. And she was really hesitant to do this at first, but she spoke of this milestone experience in her first work, The Civius. And I'll talk more about The Civius later on, Scivias, this amazing book. We'll talk about that in a second. But her hesitancy, it wasn't from being stubborn, okay? Doubt is what had stopped her. She says that. So as did this fear of kind of like, quote unquote, bad opinion and diversity of human words. She just didn't feel like she had the confidence to articulate them. She only started writing of her visions after she got sick. She was, quote, laid low by the scourge of God. That's what she says. So as Hildegard of Bingen wrote down what she saw, portions of what she completed were read out loud to Pope Eugene III. Now, the Pope responded with a letter of blessing. That's a big deal. The papal approval of her visions happened during the Synod of Trier, 1147 to 1148. That's a big deal. Okay, so Hildegard is the abbess in Dissen-Bodenberg, right? She's the head mistress of all the nuns. She began the process of separating her convent from the monastery. So two reasons, the reason the separation happened. One, increasing space constraints. They just didn't have enough room. And two, was a growing sense of kind of independence among the nuns. This is in the 12th century, okay? So now perhaps Hildegard's most pressing reason for a split, it might have come from her increasing emphasis on balance in all aspects of all these aspects of life. She wanted these women to really be fully integrated. And this created a lot of conflict with kind of the rigid provisions of the Benedict order. So fearing the loss of revenue from dowries that usually accompanied new entrants to the convent, and basically in order to kind of retain the dowries that had already been contributed, Hildegard and her fellow nuns faced a lot of fierce objection from the monks. They were actually literally removing, if you think about it, a revenue source from the Benedictines. And eventually, the Archbishop of Mainz forced the abbot at Dissen-Bodenberg to consent. So Hildegard of Bingen and about 20 nuns moved from Dissen-Bodenberg to Rupertsberg near the town of Bingen. And the consecration of the new church and the cloister occurred in 1152. Talk about independent. Isn't that amazing? 12th century, just total independence. I love this. All in the best interest of these amazing women religious. Now, after 6 years of difficult negotiations, Abbess Hildegard returned to her former monastery a portion of the assets that were first contributed by the women of the convent. She literally said, okay, fine, we'll give you a big chunk of this money. And in 1165, Hildegard founded a second abbey at Eibingen. Hildegard, she arranged for 30 nuns to occupy 2 vacant monasteries. So in the midst of her moving, she doubled her size and started building more buildings, allowing for space for more women who were drawn to her spirituality. Clearly, this was a God-sent moment. Just amazing. So among her writings, her first work, Liber Civius Domini, Know the Ways, was the result of a 10-year effort. So between 1141 and 1151, Civius was produced with Hildegard's lifelong friend and co-worker of God, Volmer, and it presented a total of 26 visions. The reason I'm spending some time on this is because it is like the quintessential reading. Read this in undergrad, read some of it in grad. Powerful, powerful stuff, right? So through Hildegard, through her writings, she tells the complete story of God and man. Unbelievable. So in the Civius, Hildegard portrays a magnificent history of salvation from creation through the order of redemption, the development of the church to perfection at the end of times. I mean, this is like salvation history vision. So it ends with the Symphony of Heaven and an early version of Hildegard's musical compositions. Oh yeah, by the way, she was a super talented musician. So it's pretty prophetic. This book is prophetic. And it's kind of admonishing in the manner of like Ezekiel and the book of Revelation. There's apocalyptic writing, but it's just truth, okay? It also famously describes kind of the structures of the universe as an egg. And that imagery gets associated with Hildegard all the time. Okay, another book, Ordo Virtutum, or Order of the Virtues, Hildegard wrote during the relocation of her abbey at Rupertsberg, like we talked about, and it represents kind of the eternal struggle between good and evil, 35 dramatic dialogues, 69 musical compositions. You can imagine her writings are more like operas. They're more like these like super poetic, they have music that go with them, for crying out loud. Each composition has its own original poetic text, and then the dialogues illustrate man's subconscious virtues. Now for Hildegard, music was a really special gift from God to support the salvation of man. Isn't that a cool way to think about it? So the Ordo Virtutum emphasizes the importance of music in communicating spiritual subtext. In other words, Hildegard really brought forth this idea of prayer in the context of song. I mean, she's in many ways you can't give her all the credit, but she's really one of the founders of the idea of worship music, not chant per se, but worship in our music. Isn't that amazing? Now, between 1158 and 1163, Hildegard worked on, and she completed her second principal work, Liber Vitae Meritorum, Book of Life's Merits. And in some ways, The book was really kind of a continuation of the virtues, Ordo Virtutum, as it depicts the eternal struggle between good and evil, virtue and vice. But the Book of Life Merits is really innovative. So in and of itself, it contains one of the earliest descriptions of purgatory as the stop before heaven, where a soul works off its debts. Now, around the same time, Hildegard started working on her practical guides to nature and healing. So the work was originally called The Book of the Subtleties of the Diverse Nature of Creatures. That's nice and easy to say, right? So one section of the work focused on descriptions of medicine and natural remedies, while others emphasized the causes of disease along with various treatment methods. That's right. She was also a doctor. This is unbelievable. This woman is unreal, right? She literally was not just a spiritual healer. She was a physical healer. That's incredible. In the 13th century, this work split into two component parts. So the two volumes became known as Physica and Cause et Cure. They're perhaps really considered by scholars Hildegard of Bingen's most famous texts, and almost certainly the first of their kind ever written by a woman in Europe. That's just awesome. She's amazing. So her last great work was Liber Divinorum Operum, or Book of Divine Works, written from 1163 to 1170. The 10 visions in this work address the birth and existence of the cosmos and consider nature in the light of faith. And she basically paints the world as God's masterpiece of artwork. And then she also discusses her belief that man represents and reflects everything in the cosmos, a real connection to the cosmos, which is kind of amazing. All of man's physical and mental conditions exist likewise throughout the universe, this kind of powerful universal energy. Again, understanding that this is coming from just an incredible, diverse discipline of faith. This woman was amazing. I mean, she's just so well versed. Don't get confused here. The perspective of interconnectivity, it really resembles a lot of the similar experiences by those who've experienced kind of an awakening process. Everything is connected and inseparable in God. And I know that sounds kind of Buddhist, but be assured it's through a vision of God and Jesus Christ, the one, that language and that imagery, you really have to read it to fully understand. Now, of course, it's been misinterpreted over years and years and years, but true Catholic spiritualists, would tell you she's not talking about like pantheism. She's talking about how the universe has a plan and we get to be a part of it. Read your Old Testament, Catholics. That's exactly what it says, all right? For Hildegard, man stands at the center of the universe. Man is the complete work of the Creator, and only man can know his Creator, us humans. If we rise, creation lifts or rises with us. If we fall, we carry creation with us. That's powerful theology, okay? She believed in a connection between every creature, which each held together by another. There's a life force that's powerful and given by God. So Hildegard's belief that we may find God's quote-unquote loving embrace in every creature, it really elevates creation above nature. And there's a reason why that's important, is because we have a soul, and that separates us. And we can get into this on another show, but we've already done a show on that, and you should check it out. We did a show on the soul. Check it out. So when humans move beyond self-centeredness, we stop rebelling against God. We discover communion with all creatures. A primordial joy, she says, emerges in us from a connection with nature. This is very Francis of Assisi, which, by the way, was being written before Francis of Assisi, okay? That's amazing. So our quest to become closer to God really develops by striking a balance of discovery and action. Isn't that gorgeous? So both rank equal in importance, she says. And this concept of unity and balance, it runs through all of Hildegard's writings, practices, and healing techniques, right? So for example, she considered disease a deficit or an imbalance in bodily juices, she would say. Kind of funny, right? While good health derives from the balance of spirit, mind, body. Okay, in her primary medical text, Cause et Cure and Physica, she expressed her belief that faith contributes to good health and healing. Incidentally, there's modern data to back that up. You do your own reading. But with faith comes the discipline required for good work, moderation, and the element of balance she called discretion, right? So during the last decade of her life, Hildegard completed 2 more medical texts, Liber Simplicis Medicanae and Liber Compositae Medicinae, and the book's cataloged over 280 plants cross-referenced with their healing uses. Are you kidding me? This woman is also a botanist, okay, and a biologist, for crying out loud, right? So during her lifetime, Hildegard's writings and her work struck a chord among like a lot of men and women in all these social classes, rich, poor, whatever. People from all over Europe started to come to her abbey for advice and obviously for care. Middle Ages people, we're talking 12th century. So they sought advice for health and just for good living. I mean, she was like the first spiritual spa, for crying out loud, right? In the 1160s, Hildegard held court with Emperor Friedrich Barbarossa at his palace, and in addition to Barbarossa, she also held an ongoing correspondence with 4 popes, Eugene III, Anastasius IV, Adrian IV, and Alexander III. Amazing, right? Bernard of Clairvaux and a lot of other influential leaders and thinkers of her time were her buddies. Seriously, the gal rocked with the smartest of the smart, and she certainly carried her own, if not exceeded their influence. Just amazing. So she's prolific, right? All this correspondence, unbelievable. More than 300 of Hildegard's letters survive today. So we really have a sense of who she was and her language, which is amazing. She died on September 17th in 1179 at her abbey. Now, during her lifetime, Hildegard received lots of praise as a saint. And this is more common than you might think. We think of saints as not really being known until they die. That's not really true. She, like many others, was quite famous while she was alive. Amazing. In 1228, the church initiated a formal canonization process right after she died, which ended without any result. Weird. The 16th century saw a revisit to the previously failed process of canonization. In 1979, a community of several Catholic women's associations reapplied for Hildegard's recognition as a saint and a doctor of the church, basically a teaching theologian, right? So Hildegard of Bingen finally achieved recognition as a saint and a doctor of the church in 2012. That's unbelievable. Unbelievable, right? Benedict, right? So today, St. Hildegard stands for a lot of things. She stands for holistic teaching, finding harmony within the spirit, mind, body, the interconnectivity among all of man and all of nature, and really basically the cosmic presence of our universe in each individual. And I know that that sounds new age to you when I say it. I know that that's what it sounds like. You're not reading enough. Here's the thing. Isn't it amazing how there's a natural tendency in the modern era to make those same types of findings and have those things bring us peace? Oh, I'm going to do my morning meditation where I just center my body on the universe. Hildegard is talking about that in the 12th century, and she's smarter than you are. She's telling you, yeah, you are centered. It's good to do that because God made it that way. And she knows this because she had these amazing visions from God. She's like, yeah, it makes perfect sense that there would be a collective that is God, and he made you as part of his plan. So it's good for you to focus your heart and your mind, your body and your spirit on the intention of that plan. Amazing stuff, right? Her philosophy of self-realization and individual identity appeals to a huge modern collective. All right, tons of people. It's a big deal. Now, generally, we kind of know of Hildegard in America for her music. We don't really think about her philosophy as much, except when it comes to some of the pop culture stuff. In Germany, St. Hildegard von Bingen's recognition associates most closely with natural health and wellness. You'll actually see a lot of centers like that. She served as an altruistic fixture for nature and health for a long time, well before she was a saint. And she stands out in today's profit-oriented world, basically driven by technology and artificial influence, because she speaks so counterculture to a lot of those things as giving life. Amazing stuff. So during a time when women were basically prevented from participation in public discourse, this amazing saint, Hildegard, she pressed for social issues and she promoted spiritual progress among all kinds of world leaders. Think about how powerful that is. Sad to say, Swedish forces actually destroyed Hildegard's monastery at Rupertsberg during the 30-Year War, and it kind of forced all these sisters of the convent to seek refuge at the monastery in Bingen. The monastery at Bingen was secularized in 1803, and the abbey ultimately became a parish church. Today, the church at Bingen stores Hildegard's relics in a shrine. You can still go visit them. Again, hey, contact our friends at Pathfinders Pilgrimages. Do a pilgrimage to St. Hildegard. That'd be amazing. Hildegard of Bingen remains Germany's greatest mystic and by far their greatest of God's companions. As a true sage, She mastered art and science, mysticism, medical healing, poetry, and politics. Put that in your pipe and smoke it. This gal was awesome. She influenced a ton of thinking in theology, nature, medicine, cosmology, the human condition, and the world at large. That's amazing, and perhaps the most appealing thing in a world dominated by men in the 12th century. And despite all of her apparent strengths, Hildegard expressed a beautiful vulnerability and kind of a delicate, fragile nature. This woman is a doctor of the church for a reason. Get to know her. Dig into her spirituality. Make it a part of your prayer life. I assure you, you will thank me and you will grow. I love it. I love it. And all of your friends that are into New Age religion say, hey, have you ever heard of St. Hildegard? Let me tell you where that comes from. Awesome. Thanks for listening. Sincerely, we are partners in the journey of faith. I hope you'll share the Renovo podcast with friends and foes. Send your topic suggestions, questions, and or comments to doug@odbfilms.com. Always remember to engage the tradition and live the conversion. Until next time, God bless.